Konnichiwa, Samurai James here. This is the 4th episode in my Ronin Warriors series. In this one, we're going to be talking about the episodes themselves from TV and the things that happen and how they may be tied to historical events, historical people, or historical traditions. To start off, let's go with something that some people have heard of, and that's the Imperial Regalia of Japan. In one episode, Talpa and Batamon are talking to each other, and they're talking about 3 things that could destroy the dynasty. There are 3 pieces to the Imperial Regalia of Japan. That's a sword, a mirror, and a jewel. At one point, we see the Ronin Warriors acquire something called the Jewel of Life. Now, this looks like a magatama, and a magatama is not only a very old type of artifact, it's also one of those 3 Imperial pieces of the Regalia. The Ronin Warriors acquire something called the Jewel of Life. Now visually this looks like a magatama. A magatama is an older type of jewel, and that's one of the 3 pieces of the Imperial Regalia of Japan. Now the second piece of the Imperial Regalia is something called the Kusanagi Tsurugi, which is the grass-cutting sword. While we don't quite see that in Ronin Warriors, we do see Ryo acquire the 2 Soul Swords of Fervor from Saber Strike. Of course, the Kusanagi Tsurugi is a single sword in the Imperial Regalia, and the Soul Swords of Fervor are 2 swords, but given that Ryo has 2 swords as his main weapon, this is just something that I think they did because it helped fit the storyline. It would be cool to see Sage getting a superpowered giant Nodachi, but, Ryo's the leader, so that's where we ended up. The Kusanagi Tsurugi itself is said to embody valor, which is bravery in the face of danger. Now, Ryo's virtue is virtue, but we often see him being brave in the face of danger during the show, so again, him getting the Soul Swords of Fervor very closely matches up with the concept of the Kusanagi Tsurugi. The third piece of Regalia is actually a mirror, and while it's a little bit of a stretch, I did come up with 2 possible similarities-ish in the TV series with it. And since the third piece of defeating the dynasty is the Inferno armor, a mirror could be similar to Ryo's Wildfire armor and the Inferno armor. They are almost a mirror match aside from the difference in colors, except for it's got a different design to the helmet, but they are very similar. Now, of course, this can be explained by saying it absorbs the power of the other 4 Ronin Warriors to create the Inferno armor, but since the Inferno armor itself seems to be sort of a distinct entity, there's no reason that it couldn't have a different appearance to it, but it's pretty close, and that's sort of like a reflection. Now for the other possibility, we have to stretch out to the OAVs, and in this particular one, Kikute Densetsu. In that one, we see Mukalu's Black Sun armor, which is basically a color-inverted version of the Inferno armor. And when you look at a mirror, the mirror itself is a reverse of your reflection. So if I hold up my right hand here, I'm actually holding up my left hand in a mirror. White armor, black armor, that's the inverse of it. So I can see that as being part of a mirror, but, in that case, I don't really know that that really applies to the Inferno armor being key to defeating Talpa. It's simply that the Inferno armor has a mirror of itself in the Black Inferno armor. Okay, let's get to some of the things that happen in the episodes. Of course, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the series, I've got a lot of spoilers in this, but at the same time, y'all, the series came out in 1995. That's over 25 years ago. I'm not really worried about throwing out some spoilers here. So let's get started. We often hear about samurai and how they follow their lords, and in episode 10, Talpa decides to send the Nether Spirits to destroy the Ronin Warriors. Well, this doesn't really set well with Anubis, and he says, hey, we have to defeat them on the field of battle. Talpa says, when you joined my Dark Warlords, you became mine to command. I will not permit such disobedience, which Anubis' virtue is loyalty, not obedience, even though one of the other Dark Warlords is. But I found this interesting because it goes back to the samurai and master sort of mentality. However, Anubis very much wants to be the noble samurai type person and defeat them on the battlefield rather than winning through some other means. And him questioning Talpa is sort of breaking that samurai code of you always do what your master said. So loyalty and obedience can kind of be the same thing, and I think the best distinction I've ever heard of with it is loyalty is something that is given, whereas obedience is something that is dictated. You might be loyal to a friend, but that's because you and a friend have a relationship and you're loyal to them. Obedience you can think of in terms of a military rank or something. If someone outranks you, then you're expected to be obedient to them. And that's where the obedience comes into play with the samurai and their master. The master was above the samurai, so they were expected to be obedient. A samurai could show loyalty to another samurai, but they weren't specifically obedient to them because they were on equal footing for that, so anything that they showed to each other would be more of loyalty. In this episode, the samurai don't have the thigh armor. You'll see them with the skirt, but not the separate piece for the thighs. That's correct. This piece itself actually came about later on, so not seeing that 1,000 years ago is correct, as is the straight-bladed sword that has the double edge. So all of those pieces are correct. And what I thought was a neat little nod is, as they gather up and they fight, and the Ancient One defeats Talpa, as he's, defeated and on his dying breaths there, Talpa says, "I would know who has vanquished me." And in the early days of the samurai, before the Mongol invasions, it was a very ritualized combat. The samurai would basically pick to square off with one another. Battles were a smaller scale, and they would announce what their name is, what their family was, and it was a very formalized, somewhat gentlemanly type of battle for that. So for Talpa to say, "I would know who has vanquished me," I think is a little bit of a nod to announcing your name before you would fight back then. Episode 22, this isn't specifically a historical event, but I thought it was kind of funny as Kento is jumping through the trees looking for stuff. One of the Ronin Warriors says, "Oh, Kento is part monkey." And I thought this was funny, but then in retrospect, I was kind of thinking, Kento's the only one that isn't pure-blood Japanese. I wonder if that's actually an intentional jab at him not being, fully Japanese, and that was intended to be that way, or if it's just a comedic moment. Kento does tend to get the butt of a lot of jokes there, so that, might not be anything big, but I don't know if there was any sort of historical animosity with Japan and China that's a little bit of a nod to, but yeah, it was funny. Episode 22 and Lord Saberstrike. He is such a close favorite for me, right behind Anubis. When they meet, Ryo says, "Announce yourself," and Saberstrike announces himself. Like I mentioned earlier, this was common with battles between samurai. When they would meet, they would announce themselves and their lineage, because if you killed someone that had a very long family line or was very well respected, that was an extra point of honor to you. So it was much better to kill someone of higher status in a battle. There's a whole other video that I'll do for that later on, but that's why they announce themselves. And Saberstrike, being one of the most honorable villains, and I'm going to use villains in air quotes here, an opponent of sorts that the Ronin Warriors fight, it's interesting to see just how much he does that's reflective of a samurai rather than a bad guy. Saberstrike, of course, challenges Ryo, and all the rest of the Ronin Warriors jump in, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll accept your challenge." And at this point, it's sort of a 5-on-1 thing, which, in some cases could certainly be considered dishonorable. So this is one of those strange places where, Saberstrike is actually more honorable than the Ronin Warriors, and we see a little bit of a shift here. Now, as they're fighting, Ryo ends up at a disadvantage once his swords are busted, and his tiger, White Blaze, ends up getting accidentally hit by Saberstrike, protecting Ryo. Now, Saberstrike could follow up with this, and he could finish Ryo off, but he doesn't. He stops, he steps back, and he says, "I honor your tiger's sacrifice. We will fight again at a later date." And later on, Ryo ends up stuck in a bamboo cage of sorts where he would be easy pickings for Saberstrike. But does Saberstrike kill him? No, he doesn't. He could, but he doesn't. He says, "Look, I told you it would mean nothing to meet you now. I want to beat you in a fair fight." And this is just another one of those really cool, honorable type of opponent things. Now, of course, is this a plot device? Yes, it is. But it's a plot device that has a nod to the historical concept of honorable samurai. Now, were all samurai honorable? No. I mean, they use firearms and all sorts of other stuff, historically speaking, but I'm speaking to this from the perspective of what we all envision the classic noble samurai as being, not specifically what they historically were, just some of the historical things they did. Now, as far as Saberstrike not finishing Ryo off and saying, "I want to beat you in a fair fight," there's a cool historical samurai story here where the Usagi and the Takeda clan were fighting against each other, and they'd been fighting against each other for years. Now, the Takeda clan had allied with another clan called the Hojo clan. The Hojo was supplying Takeda with a lot of supplies so that they could keep up the battle against the Usagi clan. Now, things happened, and the Takeda clan broke off their alliance with the Hojo clan, and the Hojo clan said, "Alright, then we're not sending you anything else," which left them at a severe disadvantage to the Usagi. The Usagi clan could have come in and wiped out the Takeda clan, But when they heard about it, they'd been fighting for years and years, and even though they were fighting, they were one of these weird, like, fighting friends sort of things. Like, they both fought each other and they went at it hardcore, but they also really, really respected each other. So Usagi clan said, you know what, that's not cool, Hojo clan sucks. They actually sent supplies to the Takeda clan, the people they were trying to fight against, and told them, look, we fight you with sword, not with rice. And, you know, that's the exact same thing with Lord Saberstrike. He wants to win in a fair fight, and just like the Usagi could have wiped him out unfairly by using, you know, lack of supplies and some of the classic techniques for trying to wait out castles and things like that, they wanted a fair fight. They said, we're going to beat you with a sword, or we're not doing it at all. If you've heard of Takeda and Usagi before, it's probably from Takeda Shinjin and Usagi Kenshin. They're very well known and possibly where the whole dragon and tiger thing comes from. Usagi Kenshin was called the Dragon of Echigo. Takeda Shinjin was called the Tiger of Kai, so dragon fighting tiger. Now, Kenshin was sometimes called the Tiger of Echigo since he was born in the year of the tiger, but he was most often referred to as the dragon. So again, dragon and, you know, tiger fighting each other, just a classic. Okay, back to Ronin Warriors. During one of the flashbacks, Saberstrike is waiting to fight Talpa in the Netherrealm. And as Saberstrike is waiting around, he's, you know, checking his watch, he's going, Talpa, you dishonor me by not meeting me at the appointed place in the appointed time. Which goes to show, once again, that Talpa is very dishonorable, and Saberstrike himself is one of the honorable people. Even though they're both bad guys, there's clearly a distinction between them. Then Talpa and Saberstrike, they start getting into it and fighting each other. And of course they have dialogue during their fight, like all fight scenes are. And as they're fighting, Talpa even says, you don't fight like a dynasty warrior does. And Saberstrike himself says, too much honor for your taste? And during this fight, Talpa says, look, if you beat me, you're going to become the Lord of the Netherrealm. Is this really what you want? Saberstrike says, your crazy ambition to conquer this world has put our own realm in jeopardy. And this might be a historical allusion to one of the people who was known as one of the three great unifiers as Japan, Oda Nobunaga. He started off wanting to unite the country, but he was going to unite the country through war. And at points later in his life, people thought he was absolutely insane, and he was essentially threatening the safety of Japan by trying to unify them through battle. And you can see some close parallels between Oda Nobunaga and Talpa, not at a very deep level, but at least at a top level, because again, this is an anime, it's not going real deep in the woods here, they're not trying to relate to a real person, but the crazy person trying to take over, and the crazy person trying to take over. Talpa is the Lord of the Netherrealm, and in some documents by Louis Freud, who was one of the Jesuit priests, we actually have heard that Nobunaga called himself the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, Lord of the Netherrealm, that's a lot closer of a tie-in there for relation. And Lord Saberstrike and a guy named Mitsuhide Akechi, I think also have some level of parallel there. Mitsuhide Akechi is one of the people who worked with Oda Nobunaga, but was known for being a very religious, very upstanding samurai. He did not agree with Nobunaga destroying and burning temples and killing children and everything else. And at one point, Mitsuhide Akechi actually turned on Oda Nobunaga, killing him at Honnoji Temple. And I think this is kind of cool because it shows the parallel between Saberstrike and Akechi Mitsuhide. Akechi Mitsuhide may have, we don't know exactly why he decided to kill him, but may have decided because of all of Nobunaga's affronts of going crazy and doing all these things that, Akechi just, Mitsuhide could not get himself behind, being a very devout Buddhist. He may have decided it was time for Nobunaga to go for the safety of the country. Same thing here with Saberstrike. He has decided that Talpa simply needs to go to keep the Netherworld sane. And of course, as an opponent of the Ronin Warriors, his time's going to come to an end. But even down to the last moment, as Saberstrike sits there dying, and White Blaze is also dying, who is Ryu's tiger, Saberstrike realizes that Talpa's reign must end. So he says, Black Blaze, I want you to go with them. And, he basically wills the spirit of his tiger into Ryu's White Blaze to keep him alive. So down to his last moment, Saberstrike was simply a really honorable opponent. In episode 25, we see Red Torrent introduced, who is an evil clone of Sai. As they're fighting, Sai realizes he simply can't overpower him. No matter what he does, Red Torrent is simply better at it physically. And to defeat him, he has to clear his mind, has to focus, and then, you know, sort of like stop resisting, and then he's actually able to beat Red Torrent. Well, there's a Japanese concept called mushin, which means no mind. You have to separate yourself from everything else. And this is pretty close to what Sai does. He stops worrying about the battle and everything else, and then he's able to win it. Sai finally hits his epiphany, and he stands there in Red Torrent's Super Wave Smasher as the water simply flows right around him. This might be a nod to Bruce Lee. One of Bruce Lee's famous quotes is, "Be like water. Water is shapeless, water is formless. When you pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water into a bowl, it becomes the bowl. When you pour water into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and water can crash. Be like water, my friend." And since that's specifically about water and Sai's element is water, I think there's a really strong tie-in there. And I'm sure one of the writers had a thing for Bruce Lee in his quote, so it's a pretty strong tie-in. So a couple fun things here just to keep a little bit of levity to the video. In episode 27, there's a farmer that's rolling along in his field in a tractor. Kento actually just jumps up on top of the tractor in his sub-armor, which would be like metal and heavy and, you know, you'd think makes some sort of noise and all. But dude just lands on top of the tractor and sprawls out, and Farmer John keeps puttering along and doing stuff. Dude didn't hear him? What's up with that? Episode 28, we see the Ronin Warriors meet probably their most insightful moment ever. Lady Kyra's a girl. I don't know why I laughed so hard at that. Episode 31, Rowan fires an arrow and he says, "See my signal, guys." There's a type of arrow called a kobura that was fired historically, and this goes back 1,000 years and is actually still used even today. They would be fired to announce the opening of a battle, or sometimes fired in a large group to try to startle the enemy or distract them. It's an arrow that when you shoot it, it makes a whistling sound. Now in modern day context, they're used as part of, you know, religious cleansing ceremonies to drive away evil spirits, but they originated from the battlefield. So even though he says, "See my signal" rather than "hear my signal," that's a pretty close little allusion to it, especially as a samurai archer and the type of person who would have fired one historically. In episode 32, we see something kind of similar, but from the Dynasty. One of the Dynasty soldiers throws his weapon up in the sky and they see it glint, and then the Dynasty swarms to start attacking the Ronin Warriors. Once again, a weapon used as a signal rather than an attacking weapon, just like they did historically. And one more item that I want to take a look at is the Staff of the Ancients. It has 6 rings on it, 3 on each side. In the Buddhist faith, there are 6 levels. There is heavenly, there's demigod, there's human, there's animal, there's ghosts, and there's hell. 6 stratas. Now this staff holds incredible power, even over the nether spirits and everything in the human world. It doesn't quite work in the nether realm, but, you know, it's potentially the most powerful thing that we see in the entire series. Doesn't have so much power because it's tied into the concept of all those 6 different tiers within the Bushido faith. Buddhist faith, not Bushido. I spend too much time doing samurai stuff. It's like force of habit. So that's going to wrap up episode 4 of my little mini-series here on Ronin Warriors. I hope you've enjoyed them, and once again, my thanks to Dawn Sonata for all of her work in keeping up with everything, for supplying me the pictures that I use for the 2nd and 3rd video, for those historical pictures from the memorial book for the Ronin Warriors and for the Dark Warlords. Appreciate her keeping up on the Facebook page. She has done countless fan translations for us, for things that Japan never exported to us, that we only have available through fan translation. So if you've ever come across any of those, it's almost certainly her work. So my thanks to her. And as always, this is Samurai James saying thanks for watching and sayonara.